I've always been a bit of a nomad, chasing the thrill of new places to crash for a weekend. And Airbnb was my go-to for uncovering unique stays. Last summer, I found what seemed like a dream rental. A secluded cabin deep in the Pacific Northwest, perfect for a writer like me desperate to escape Seattle's chaos and finish a novel. The listing painted an idyllic picture. A quaint wooden cabin with a wraparound porch, a massive stone fireplace, and nothing but dense pine forests for miles. The host, Carl, had a profile brimming with 5-star reviews, guests raving about his warm welcome and the cabin's rustic charm. I was sold. I packed my laptop, a bag of snacks, and some warm clothes, then drove 3 hours into the mountains, the roads narrowing to gravel as my GPS stuttered. By the time I reached the cabin at dusk, the sky was a bruised purple, and the place looked almost too perfect, like a postcard, though the peeling paint and sagging porch gave it a slightly neglected vibe. I grabbed the key from the lockbox and stepped inside, instantly hit by a wave of heavy air, like the house was holding its breath. The living room was frozen in the 70s, with garish floral couches, warped wooden floors, and a faint smell that clung to everything. Damp wood mixed with something sharp, almost metallic, like old blood. I told myself it was just the quirks of an old house and set up my laptop by the fireplace, trying to focus. But the windows, pitch black and reflective, made me feel exposed, like eyes were staring back from the dark. Every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt through me, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. I laughed it off. City nerves, right? But the unease wouldn't let go. Around midnight, as I typed, a faint tapping broke the silence, like fingernails clicking against glass, coming from the kitchen. My heart thudded as I stared into the dark doorway, the sound stopping as abruptly as it started. I crept to the kitchen, flipping on the light, but found nothing, just a greasy window over the sink, smudged with streaks. I convinced myself it was a branch or the wind, and headed to bed, locking the bedroom door and wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. The next morning, I froze when I saw it. A small handprint on the inside of the kitchen window, far too tiny to be mine, its edges smudged like it had been there for days. My stomach twisted as I searched the cabin, checking closets, under beds, even behind the heavy curtains. Nothing. I messaged Carl, my hands shaking, asking if anyone else had access to the place. His reply came in seconds. "Nope, just you. Probably a smudge from cleaning." The cheeriness of his words felt wrong, like he'd rehearsed them. That day I tried to write, but the house seemed to hum with a low, oppressive energy. I found a photo frame in the hallway, tucked behind a dusty lamp, showing a family, 2 adults and a child, staring blankly at the camera. The glass was cracked, and the child's face was scratched out, leaving only a jagged void. I shoved it back where I found it, my skin crawling. That night, the tapping returned, louder, more deliberate, moving around the house like something was testing the walls. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and sat on the couch, eyes darting to the windows. Then I saw it, a shadow, hunched and low, scuttling past the porch. It wasn't an animal. It moved with purpose, pausing as if it knew I was watching. My breath caught, and I gripped the knife tighter, the blade trembling in my hand. The next morning, I was a wreck, running on no sleep and raw nerves. While pacing the living room, I noticed a rug that seemed slightly askew. Lifting it, I found a trap door, its wood scarred with deep scratches, like claws had raked it over and over. A faint sour stench wafted up, and I gagged, dropping the rug back in place. I didn't have the courage to open it, but the thought of what might be down there made my blood run cold. I started packing, my hands fumbling, when I heard a low hum, like a voice muffled through the walls, coming from the direction of the trap door. It wasn't words, just a droning guttural sound that made my teeth ache. I threw my stuff in the car and messaged Carl that the place was too creepy. I was leaving early. He didn't respond. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and swore I saw the cabin's front door crack open just an inch, though no one stepped out. A week later, I stumbled across a news article online. That cabin was tied to a string of missing persons cases, all AirBnB guests who'd stayed there over the past 5 years. Police had raided the property and found hidden cameras embedded in the walls, their feeds wired to a setup in the crawl space below the trap door. They found other things down there too, things they wouldn't describe, but no sign of Carl. Locals whispered about something living in those woods, something that used the cabin to lure people in. I still check my locks every night, wondering if whatever was watching me is still out there. I'm a grad student, always scraping by. So when I found a dirt-cheap Airbnb in Chicago for a conference last fall, I didn't hesitate. It was a shared apartment, just a spare bedroom in a glossy high-rise downtown with views that should have cost way more than my budget. The host, Emily, seemed like a typical urbanite. Her profile had a bright, smiling photo, and she described herself as a yoga instructor who loved hosting travelers. The reviews were solid, though one guest mentioned she was a bit intense, which I shrugged off. I'd only be there 2 nights. I arrived late, around 10 p.m., after a delayed flight, and Emily buzzed me up. When she opened the door, her smile was wide, almost too wide, and her eyes locked onto mine, scanning me like she was cataloging every feature. The apartment was stunning. Sleek furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows with the city sparkling below, and a faint scent of incense that didn't quite mask something acrid underneath. My room was small but clean, with a sturdy lock on the door, which I was grateful for after Emily's lingering handshake. She said she'd be out most of the next day, so I'd have the place to myself, and I collapsed into bed, exhausted. But even as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment was too quiet, like it was waiting for something. At 3 a.m., I snapped awake to whispering just outside my door. Low, guttural, like a chant in a language I couldn't place, all harsh consonants and drawn-out vowels. My heart pounded as I lay still, straining to hear, but the sound faded, replaced by soft, deliberate footsteps moving down the hall. I checked my phone. No Wi-Fi, no signal, which made no sense in a high-rise in the middle of Chicago. I sat up, clutching the blanket, and noticed a faint glow under the door, like someone was standing just outside with a light. It flickered, then vanished. I didn't sleep after that, jumping at every creak of the building. The next morning, Emily was gone, as promised. But the apartment felt wrong. The air was thick, almost syrupy, and I kept catching glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shadows that darted behind the furniture, gone when I turned to look. I tried to shake it off and headed to the conference, but I couldn't focus, my mind replaying that whisper. I came back early and found my room's door slightly ajar, the lock disengaged. My suitcase was unzipped, clothes strewn across the bed like someone had rummaged through them. When Emily got home, I confronted her, my voice shaky. She laughed, a sharp, hollow sound, and said she'd checked for bed bugs while I was out. Her eyes didn't match her smile. They were cold, almost predatory, like she was testing me. I nodded, not wanting to push her, and retreated to my room, locking the door. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair and sat on the bed. A kitchen knife in my lap, every nerve on edge. The whispering started again, closer, right against the door, now mixed with a faint scratching, like nails dragging slowly across the wood. My breath hitched as the door handle jiggled, the chair creaking as it shifted forward an inch. I gripped the knife, my palms sweaty, and tried calling 911, but my phone showed no bars, the screen glitching with static. The whispering grew louder, more voices joining in, overlapping in a sickening chorus. I swear I heard my name, woven into the chant, drawn out like a taunt. At one point, I saw a shadow move under the door, long and thin, like fingers reaching through the gap. When morning finally came, the sound stopped, and I threw my stuff into my bag, my hands trembling so badly I could barely zip it. As I fled, I noticed a photo on the living room wall, a group of people, all staring directly at the camera, Emily in the center. The frame was dusty, like it had been there for decades, but the faces looked familiar, like I'd seen them in passing, maybe on missing posters. A month later, I found a true crime forum online, my heart sinking as I read about that building. Tenants reported hearing chants at night, seeing shadows that moved on their own, and feeling watched. One post mentioned a yoga instructor who'd vanished after police started digging into her for suspicious activity. They found journals in her apartment, filled with names of guests. Mine was there, circled in red ink. The forum claimed she wasn't acting alone, that something in that building was using her to collect people. I still wake up some nights, convinced I hear that whispering again. Last winter, I needed a cheap place to stay while visiting family in rural Tennessee. And with hotels out of my budget, I turned to AirBnB. I found a listing for a grand Victorian house, about 20 minutes outside town. Described as a historic gem with antique furniture, stained glass windows, and a sprawling garden choked with roses. The host, Margaret, was an older woman who lived on the property but promised guests their privacy. And her reviews were glowing, filled with praise for her warm hospitality and homemade pies. It sounded like a steal. When I arrived, the house loomed against the gray sky, its turrets and gables giving it a Gothic, almost menacing beauty. Margaret greeted me at the door, dressed in a long, old-fashioned gown that looked like it belonged in a museum, her smile welcoming but her eyes sharp, like she was sizing me up. She led me to my room, a cavernous space with a 4-poster bed, heavy velvet curtains, and a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, undercut by something sour, like rotting meat left in a forgotten corner. Margaret told me to make myself at home, but warned me to stay out of the basement, saying it was under renovation, with a tone that didn't invite questions. I nodded, though her piercing gaze made my skin prickle, and I couldn't wait for her to leave me alone. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard singing from downstairs, soft, off-key, unmistakably Margaret's voice. But it felt wrong, like she was mimicking someone else's song, the notes twisting into something unnatural. I locked my door, my hands shaking, and shoved a dresser against it, the singing droning on for hours, seeping into my dreams. The next morning, I explored the house, trying to distract myself, but every room felt oppressive. The hallway had a cold spot that made my breath fog, and a mirror in my room warped my reflection, stretching my face until it looked like someone else's. I found a locked door at the end of the hall, its handle icy to the touch, and when I pressed my ear against it, I heard a faint rustling, like something shifting on the other side. Later, I noticed knocking from the basement, sharp and rhythmic, whenever Margaret wasn't around. I asked her about it over breakfast, and her face tightened, her voice clipped as she blamed old pipes and changed the subject. That afternoon, I found an old guest book in the parlor, its pages yellowed and brittle. The entries started out normal, guests praising the house. But the later ones were strange, written in shaky handwriting. She watches me at night. The basement hums. I don't think she's human. The last entry was just a smear of ink, like the pen had been ripped away. I slammed the book shut, my pulse racing. That night, the singing turned to sobbing. Loud, guttural, echoing through the house like a wounded animal. It was coming from the basement, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I crept downstairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and found the living room empty. The air so cold it burned my lungs. The basement door was ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling out. Against every screaming instinct, I pushed it open and descended, the stairs creaking under my weight. The air grew thicker, almost liquid. The smell of decay was overwhelming. At the bottom, my flashlight caught a dirt floor, shelves lined with jars of dark, viscous liquid, and a single chair facing a cracked mirror. Scratched into the mirror were words, "She sees you." The sobbing stopped, and the silence was worse. I turned to run, and Margaret was there, at the top of the stairs, her smile wide, her teeth glinting too sharp in the dim light. I shoved past her, my shoulder brushing hers. She was cold like stone, and sprinted to my car, not stopping until I reached a motel. The next day, I looked up the house online. It had been abandoned since the 90s, when Margaret died in a fire that gutted the basement. Locals said the house was cursed, that something wore her face to lure people in, feeding on their fear. They found bones in the garden, too small to be animal, and those jars in the basement. The police wouldn't say what was in them, but they sealed the house off. I still dream about that mirror, and sometimes, when I look in one, I swear my reflection smiles before I do.